I'll introduce myself a little bit. I am Neel. Currently, I work as a senior designer at Myntra. Before this, I've worked for almost 3 years at Flipkart and Goibibo Make My Trip. So I've worked in travel and e-commerce predominantly. Apart from that, I've done a lot of freelance work in rental space and management, and with a few clients back in the US. This is almost my 5th year into this journey, and I've also been a student of KIT University at one point of time in my life. So that's about me. We'll quickly jump into the topic because this will give you a brief understanding of what a design role in India specifically means, and it'll show you a bit of a contrast between the apps that you use, which have been designed in the West, and how it compares to the current audience that India has. And it's not predominantly me and you, it's people who are coming online for the first time. It may be your parents, people who work at your home, and so on and so forth. Even your professors and teachers for that matter. So this is today's topic, designing for the next billion. Now, what does the next billion essentially mean? So if you look at it, internet has always had its roots from a long time ago, right from we were working on desktop computers, and then the web browser came in, and then it started moving on to feature phones where internet was available, and then smartphones came to be. And now we see them everywhere, from phones to watches to televisions and all those things. The next billion is essentially that part of the market segment which has just been introduced to internet. They have no legacy learnings from what we have had since from when we were kids. This is just probably due to the lack of awareness or means for which they have not had that, but today they do because of reasons that we would eventually deal. So there are total of 10 big emerging markets in the world which constitute this next billion phase. This includes Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Turkey, China, Indonesia, and India being one of the biggest ones. Now, today we'll just be discussing about India specifically because a lot of the jobs that are offered here are building products which are specifically targeted towards India. So if you look at this graph, it's a comparison between the population from 2015 and expected population by the end of 2020 between US, India, and China. So what you see is the population difference between what the US has today versus what India is and China is huge. But at the same time, if you compare the internet population, the current internet population that's there. So the data from back in 2015, it shows that approximately 263 million people in the US had internet access, where India 360 million people had, and China 678 million people had. While by the end of this year, while the US will still only reach to 290, 291 million people, India would reach around 650 million. So within a span of 5 years, the count has almost doubled. And this entire new internet age population is the one that has no history of internet whatsoever. What they have learned about the internet is based on the experiences that are present today and not that were present historically. To put some context into the popularity of internet, the total New Year's Eve messages on WhatsApp in 2006 in India alone, for people sending out messages to their friends and family and relatives just to wish New Year's, this population, which is just 600, this is oddly 360 million people. This population sent out around 14 billion messages back in 2016. Just to give you, this just gives you a sense of scale on how big internet has been a part of in a country like India to help people connect with each other and explore the world around them. To talk in terms of pure business perspective, and this is purely e-commerce because I come from an e-commerce background, so it only pertains to commerce as a market. There are other market initiatives that are also there. We can discuss it about it later. So if you look at the retail market size of India, it was around $600 billion in 2015, and by the end of 2020, it could be around $100 billion. This is just the retail market. If you try to break it down on purely the e-commerce side of things, back in 2015, if the total retail market was around $600 billion, the e-tail market was only around $10 billion. Because the internet penetration was low, a lot of people were not connected to the internet. They didn't have devices that could enable them to connect to the internet. So they had very little exposure back then. However, today that $10 billion market has almost risen up to between 50 to 90. It's expected to reach 90 by the end of 2020, somewhere around 90. So you see the gap that's there. It's an 8x growth in market from a pure business perspective for companies to sell products online. This shows us that from a pure business perspective, commerce and internet products in general have a massive opportunity in India, which is something that a lot of companies have started realizing. And that's also the reason why a lot of products that used to exist in the West back a couple of years back have all launched in India. A lot of these products have now started being developed in India first and then being taken off over the rest of the world. Take, for example, TikTok, which is one of the most popular social network apps as of right now. It got so big only because of how much Indians actually actively participated in it. Most of the TikTok users are from India, and the scale that that particular company has achieved would never have been possible if India would not have been there to skyrocket it into that particular phase. So let's just try to understand how the India's internet market is to help you understand what designing for a country like India really means. To put things into perspective, let's just say that India is a home to many small Indias, which essentially could differ from region and from different cultures of the society, different sections of the society, where lifestyles are different, their perceptions are different, what they've been taught from their childhood till now are different, their values are also somehow same but different. So culturally, India is a lot more diverse as opposed to the rest of the world. So to assume that you build something that you might like or your friends might like would not work with a lot of people in India because they don't think like you do, or they are not in a position financially or educationally even to understand those things that you can. So it's really important to, while designing products for India, to keep that into context, that what part of the country that you're targeting. Another big thing in India is, and India's journey into internet is mobile. While a lot of the countries in the West where these products had started building first, desktop was the norm back then. So it started from web design and people focused on building web-based experiences because the internet speeds were much better on the desktop. A lot of people had access to computers, and from there they transitioned into the mobile space. Whereas in India, most of the population has come in contact with internet from their phones. They have no preconceived notions on how the desktop used to work. A lot of people don't understand the nuances of browsers and tabs and cursors because they've never really used them. They've never really seen how that works or what that even looks like. All they know is the apps that they've seen on their phone and interacted with. And a lot of times what has happened is that they learn what they see. So a lot of how these people in India have learned about internet and about mobile is by using the apps that they use and their friends might have recommended them to use, or people in their social circles use. That's the extent of their internet education. So obviously, mobile is an integral part of India's internet life. So there are three common activities that we carry out while using our mobile phones. That is information, entertainment, and connection. These three are the key pillars which have made mobile essentially a window into the world, and internet being the messenger. So this brings us to the three C's, which are the three principles of any mobile experience, especially pertaining to the next billion market, especially emphasizing on India. Sorry. Yeah. So these three are connectivity, cost, and complexity. And we'll discuss each of them. But before moving on, just give you an example. The second largest mobile operating system, we already know that Android is the largest operating system in India. Most people have Android phones. But what we do miss out a lot on, that the second largest mobile operating system in the world, we think is the iPhone or iOS, for example. But it isn't actually iOS. It's something called KaiOS. KaiOS accounts for approximately 18 or 17.2% of the mobile phones in India. You might have seen a lot of KaiOS devices, but you might not recognize what the operating system underlying there was. One of the big examples of this is the JioPhone that came out. JioPhone is essentially a smart feature phone which runs KaiOS. A lot of Nokia devices that have started coming out again, which are basically feature phones, but they run a smartphone-like operating system, which gives people access to a lot of the apps that you have access to your Android phones. But this is really cheap. These are really cheap devices. This is $500 to $1,000 and $1,500. This is one of the ways a lot of people in our country are connected to the internet. So dumb phones aren't so dumb anymore. Smartphones aren't so expensive anymore. So this essentially has rushed people in India into an internet age, and the data price, especially with Jio coming in, and the data price is going pretty low. People have started coming onto the internet even more and more because it's not so expensive. Internet is a window to our world, and to just give you an idea of what I mentioned earlier, where people learn internet or how mobile apps and everything work because of what they are exposed to. So a lot of people's perception of what the internet really is gets formed because of these three. It's YouTube, Facebook, and WhatsApp. These are the three primary apps that most people who come on the internet have. YouTube has almost surpassed all its viewing numbers every year because of India itself. The total amount of watch hours that Indians clock is at par with the rest of the world as of today. Same is the story with Facebook, and I already showed you an example of what the kind of engagement that WhatsApp gets from India. So what is from here to understand is that a company like Google is nowhere in the picture. So something that Google is building, a lot of people in India know that you can ask Google for answers, but they don't know how to do it. Even from a statistic that YouTube had published last year, a lot of people have started using the YouTube search bar to ask questions because they expect those answers to be given to them in a video or an audio format. These people are not very comfortable reading everything that's displayed on the screen. This may be because of eye strain or something that they're not used to. And likewise, coming on to cost. So cost is the first pillar that we had mentioned. Now we already see there are low-end phones which are available at a very cheap price. Redmi and some of the ones have been leading charge on it. You can get a decent quality phone for 4,000, 5,000 rupees today. It's also a social device. So there are a lot of places, in a lot of families, you'll see that the father usually has a smartphone which the child uses to play games, or their wife uses to watch videos in their meantime. So the device is not just for one person, and a lot of times these devices are for the entire family. So in cases like these, the storage is very limited. These cheap phones usually have a 4 GB or an 8 GB memory cap, and a lot of that is already taken up by the operating system that's dealing with it. So people are very cautious about what they are storing on their devices, and they want to keep as much space available for their personal things. For example, the images and videos that people share with them on WhatsApp, and pictures that they take from their camera, and so on. Those are the things that take the most precedence when it comes to utilizing your storage. Since the storage on the device is low, people don't usually download a lot of apps because they take up space. And a lot of these apps are very big. For us, an app worth 80, 90 MB is no big deal because we can download it from a Wi-Fi connection. These people don't have a Wi-Fi connection. Their data plans are fairly limited, and they would much rather choose to spend that data limit on watching something on YouTube rather than downloading a 100 MB app, which doesn't serve them much purpose, just to try it out. So storage is also a big concern there. The second one, connectivity. Even though Jio today claims that its 4G connectivity is present everywhere, and Airtel also makes that same claim, but we all know that that is not true. The network connectivity is patchy and it's inconsistent. There are corners of your house where your signal just drops to 1 bar, and there are some spots in your house where the signal is pretty good. So when you have to make calls, you would usually walk to that corner when you're making video calls, and you'll sit there, finish that call, and then come back, because you know that if you walk around your house, the internet network would drop and your call will get disconnected. So that's another big problem, that even though the speeds are available, it's not consistent. So now, how does one person decide if they want to have an app or not? It depends on the value and the frequency. If it's something that's really valuable for you, for example, the grocery app. If you live in a metro and you don't have time to shop for groceries every day, you can have a grocery app which adds a lot of value inside your life. For the likes of Instagram, which you open almost every day, multiple times a day, to spend short bursts of time where you feel like you're free and just to engage with people you know. So that's an app where the making is the frequency. It might not give you as much value, but you use it frequently. So these two factors determine what apps we usually keep on our phone, and especially phones with limited storage space. Anything which affects these, people tend to avoid. So what should we do about complexity? Things that are there. So a lot of people now that we mentioned don't really know how to use these. So what they would usually do is, and I'm sure you would have experienced a lot in by yourself as well, that someone elder who has just bought a phone or who's trying to do something would have asked you how to do this particular thing, or how to post a picture on Facebook, or how to upload how to send a voice message on WhatsApp, or upload a picture on WhatsApp, or form a group, and so on and so forth. So what they do is, initially they require help to understand how to do certain things. As soon as they learn that, they keep repeating those actions and then they learn them. So a lot of these features that they use and a lot of behaviors that they exhibit on their phones is things that they have learned because they have done it repeatedly. So now it's in their muscle memory, as opposed to truly understanding how to do it, to repeat that pattern somewhere else as well. They would recall if they see similar elements. So that's a very common example is the share button. If you see one icon of share and you use it predominantly in one app, All the other apps where you see that same icon, you recognize it as share. But if you see a different icon of share which you have never seen before, even though it does the same thing, you would not know it. And the chances of you clicking that would be very less. It's because you've never learned that what that icon means. And obviously, community defines usage. So what this means is essentially what is present in your circle. You tend to use those apps so that you can be connected with them. And it also sort of reinforces that behavior in you that, okay, I know this person is using it, so it must be valuable. I should try and use that too. A very good example of this is the back in college where there was a time where a lot of chat messenger apps were common. There was Hike, there was WeChat, there was Line, and there was WhatsApp. All these things used to exist. There was BlackBerry Messenger as well as one point of time. But eventually what we saw was most people's friend circles were present on WhatsApp as opposed to any other one. So after a certain point of time, as time went by, usage of the other apps kept declining and declining based on how your social circle was. And as of today, most of our communication happens on WhatsApp because that's where people we care about are. There's no point having a WeChat account anymore because the people you know are not there. So that's how community defines usage of what products you choose to use. Now, again, in terms of complexity, most of the apps that we use are designed in English. But if you look at India specifically, even though a good chunk of population in a certain age group does know English of sorts, they're not experts in it. So while they might understand basic words and try to formulate a meaning around it, they're not very fluent in reading articles and essays and complicated words and understand the meaning out of it. These people prefer simplicity more and they continue to struggle with phonetics and spellings. A lot of times when you see people typing messages and from your parents or from some of your relatives who might be from villages or so on, what you'll see there is a lot of the spellings that they use in words while they type in an English keyboard, but they're actually typing English. The spellings of the English words are not really correct because it is based on how they pronounce it and they don't really know what the spelling of that particular word is. So a lot of people write HELO, hello. It's not because don't, if they're not doing it intentionally, it's just they don't know how to spell it. And the way they've been always saying it, hello, is how they've decided to spell it. It's like HELO and so on. So those are the things that India is still getting around with. And it will always be the case for a certain target audience. Now, since all these situations are in place, which are not really common in the West or the products that you might use every day. So what do we do if we have to build designs and product solutions for this kind of an audience, which doesn't understand what a lot of icons mean, which don't understand what a lot of words mean and terms mean and so on and so forth? How do you help these people come onto the internet and interact with the product that you in particular are building? So I'll show you some examples of it just to help you out. The principle is to guide, minimize, and advise. As we saw, how their learning curve works is they first get someone's help to understand how to do it. So that's where you guide them. They prefer simplicity. So that's where you minimize what's present in their way so as they don't get overburdened by what is being shown on the screen. And advice is because they really don't know what they're doing. It's good to help in any way possible, the help that is received from your particular product as opposed to someone they know. Because if you can advise and guide, if the product can advise and guide them, if it's designed in a way that people can independently use your products as opposed to depending on someone else to help them understand. And a lot of people, in a lot of research studies that we have done offline, we found that people have the zeal to learn, but they feel like they don't understand it very well. So they keep asking their kids essentially to understand how something like this works. They have this notion that kids these days are much familiar with how mobile phones and these apps and all that work. So you would just ask them, and that inhibits their ability to understand what all they can do with the products that are available today and how their lives can be improved using that. Guide. So guide is about what to do and where to fall back to. I just described. Minimize is to retrieve and comprehend information, and advise is a knowledgeable friend in need, like we discussed. So just take some examples of it. Here's an app called Uber Lite. This is a version of Uber that was designed and developed in India specifically for the Indian market, and later on was taken to other developing countries. The big differences between the Uber app that you use versus the Uber Lite app is, while the standard Uber app is around 80 megabytes, this Uber Lite app is 1 MB. It takes around 300 milliseconds to load, and it's built for everyone. So even devices, very low powered devices, which are 4 or 5 years old, can also run this. There are no high interactive maps and everything. Every font typography is bolder, larger to help people understand, like read properly, focus on what their task is. So it's very simple. It just asks you from to, shows your choice of vehicle, and it tells you where your driver will be. You can choose to toggle on the map later on. It does not have any fancy animations that the standard Uber app has. It does not have other features that the Uber app might have today, which are not required for these people to start using Uber's services. So this is one version of the app that Uber built specifically for India, so that a lot of people who could not download the standard Uber app because of the limitations that we've discussed before, so that they could still experience what Uber is like. At the same time, uh, from understanding. So just go literal instead of abstract. So for example, here we see all categories mentioned as icons. So electronics, fashion, home. These might not be very well understandable by everyone as to what that particular item represents. So for example, in fashion, it looks like a top. So am I only going to find tops there is something that I don't know. And if it represents a top, I don't know if men's fashion would also be available there. So be literal instead of abstract. So if you people are very visually aware, they learn and scan and understand a lot more visually than text and icons. They immediately recognize what they have seen before. So going literal helps a lot there. So it's just a transition from switching from icons to images. The same idea extends further. So for example, if you're looking for sofas, now a lot of people don't know what a sofa come bed is. A lot of people don't know what futon is. So adding images against these items help people understand that this is the type of product that I'm looking for. So you might be aware that you would have seen at a friend's place that there's a bench like thing that you can fold and make it into a chair, but you don't know what that looks like, or what that is actually called. So you can never really find it. You would try describing it in a lot of places. You've tried describing it on Google, and it may understand you, it may not understand you. So being visual and literal instead of abstract representations of what you mean is always helpful for these people to understand what they're looking for. Similarly, when it comes to using language, so recommendation, for example, as a word, is something that not a lot of people might understand. But if you can also say that you may also like, which is a very simple representation of the word recommendation, which is something that a lot of people may understand. So instead of using recommendation, use simpler language as you may also like. It's on the communication bit where people could easily and much easily understand what you're showing them. Similarly, being visual about what the product is and how it works instead of just mentioning specifications in a list sort of a form. So what the if for example here, if the backrest height and the total height is mentioned, so it's easy for people to imagine from the image that this portion is the backrest height and then this portion is the floor height and that makes the total height. Being visual helps understand what is going on here and it helps people make those decisions better. Be a friend people seek. For example, if you're buying a washing machine, these washing machines usually come as a denotion of like a 6.5 kg washing machine, 6.2 kg washing machine. But people don't really understand what these weight category means. So if you simply ask them a question that what is your family size, the family of three, four, single couple, large families, which you can then map to what these kg numbers mean and then help them decide that, okay, if you have a family of four, then you need at least a 10 kg washing machine to wash all their clothes. If you're a single person, 6 kg is more than enough. So you don't need to buy a larger one. So that's how you help people understand. Again, similarly, how you break it down for them. So when it comes to rating reviews, what we do is based on the different type of product that you're looking at, we help you understand the various prospects of that particular device. So for example, you're looking at a phone, we show you differentiated ratings for cameras, battery, display, and all. Same as it comes to TV, we change to picture, sound, and delivery and installation services that are offered. Similarly, in AC, the most important things are cooling and efficiency. So those are the ones that we focus on because those are the decision-making factors. So by showing upfront how these particular aspects of that product are, you are essentially helping them decide on which air conditioner to buy. If you don't provide representations like this, people would have to read a lot of reviews to form an opinion as to how the product actually is. Whereas a summary can help make them make that decision a lot faster. Same as with reviews. So there are sections created for reviews of all the things. So on TV, you have connectivity, sound. For washing machines, you have, and those sections are also created. Yeah. So I think that would be all. I think it was a little more. We can discuss more about it on the Q&A section, and it could also be unrelated completely. If there's something that you need help getting started, or in particular with this topic of in pursuing design before just getting started, please feel free to ask whatever questions you might have.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat section. So if you could head over there. So Nisha is asking if she has a question for you. So if you could get over there.
Sure. Yeah, I've just got it. Uh, in the scenario, how do you think would augmented reality and 3D viewer on the website help any e-commerce company? Good question, Nisha. So there are certain things to keep in mind. So when we talk about this particular population where devices are fairly limited in what they can do, since these are cheap devices which don't have a lot of processing power to handle something like an augmented reality system. So it wouldn't be as beneficial, and it's also so you always have to look at a cost to coverage ratio. So if I have to today design 3D AR based experience for a company like Flipkart, most of our audiences would not be able to make good use of that because they don't have phones which are capable of doing that well. The app would hang, their phone would become laggy, and they would never really come back and try that again. It is also possible that they could even uninstall the app thinking that the app doesn't work well. But yes, that does make sense in a niche sort of an environment. So, for example, a company like Urban Ladder, which sells furniture on the metro metro cities, there it's a lot more valuable to have something of an AR experience to place that furniture inside your home and see how that would look like, and then do it. It depends on the market that you're trying to address. Does that answer your question? Nisha, hi Nisha. Nisha, I think your mic is mute. No, Nisha, you're not. I think you're not audible to me. Can anyone else just speak so that I know that it's not something that's wrong on my side?
No, sir.
Sir, I can't even hear Nisha as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go over to the next question.
So I'll move to the next question. Please feel free to keep leaving questions in the chat. I'll keep on addressing them one by one. The next one is from Abhinav Mukherjee. Which tools are mostly used to design such things for a mobile app? So as I previously mentioned, the industry standard tool currently is Sketch. It is one which is used by most design teams and companies. However, another tool that has been coming up is Figma. Since Sketch is only limited to Mac-based machines, Figma is one that has been gaining a lot of popularity because anyone can use it because it works in a web browser and it's free of cost. So that's something that you should use if you want to get started. I would still suggest to stay away from XD because a lot of companies don't really use that. So a lot of there are some nuances in XD which you might not find in Sketch or Figma, which will lead to some relearning that you might have to do. Next question is from Shreyas. Why shouldn't this strategy of guide, keep things simple and literal apply to all markets and countries? Isn't it generally better? So, Shreyas, this depends on how the market is. So, for example, if you know how to use Facebook really well, but every time you open Facebook, I show you pop-ups and coach marks as to how to use this and how to use this, you would eventually start getting irritated. Because these are the basics that you've already learned and you've come forward from that. So your expectation from that product is that it should understand you and where you are, so that it only helps you if it thinks that you can't do it. Now that it knows that you can do it well, it doesn't really have to. So for basic products, for example, a chat application or an e-commerce application, which have been there for years in Western countries, don't usually do this. At the same time, voice assistants and Bitcoin-based applications and so on, which are even come new in the West, do use that guide, those guide principles, because that product is new to that market also.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Dheeraj. Can you share the process to become a product designer? So, okay, this is going to take long. There's no set process as such. The basics are pretty straightforward, which is true for any field. Like you learn the theory and the principles that are there. You observe applications and see how those theoretical things have been applied, so that you understand whatever text you have read or whatever tutorials you've watched, what they actually mean in practice, and then you practice on your own. So the ways to practice on your own is to find apps or websites that you may have used before, where there's a certain part which you feel doesn't work really well or is not designed well. There are a lot of problems that you may face or people you know may face while using that. And you can practice on redesigning those to sort of polish your skill set. And eventually, you can use them to build a portfolio, and that portfolio is what you use to apply for jobs and eventually end up getting one. So that's an overview of how you become a designer. A big part of it is observing what's happening around you and trying to understand why it's being done the way it's done. Cool. Next is Arushi. What tool should we start using with as a beginner for product design? As I've already mentioned, you can start with Figma. It's free. And I would still suggest tools come at a very later stage. You need to understand what to build and why to build something before actually starting building them. You can practice recreating interfaces that you have seen on the internet or on your phone on different apps. You can just start recreating it in a design tool just to get acquainted with how the tool works and practice. But when you have to actually solve a problem and build a design from scratch, that's where you would have to do a lot of work away from the tool to figure out what actually to build, where pen and paper is usually the best medium to do that. And tool comes at a very later stage. So when we usually work on projects, if the project is of a 3-month long project, we would usually open our tools at the end of the second month. The first 2 months is usually spent figuring out what to build, why are we building this, and what all do we have to take care of if we have to solve the problem that we have. Next, Rahul, how will the current situation of the virus influence the users and the types of mobile apps they will use? This is a really interesting question. So what we've seen so far in the trends that the app stores and Play Store have been showing, a lot of video conferencing and communication apps have started gaining a lot of traction. So I believe it'll start giving rise to a lot more small scale social groups where you could just have your core group of friends. House party is a very good example where you could have a video chat room with a close group of friends and talk, discuss what you're doing. You can play games in that and so on, which is what you would usually do in a social setting. From a commerce perspective, e-commerce would obviously become a lot more important in a time like this because it involves the least amount of contact as opposed to offline. So that's also there. And so this and productivity tools will also start seeing a lot of growth because you're not since a lot of work is happening in a remote sort of an environment, and a lot of the tools that we have come to take for granted don't really work very well when it comes to a remote based setup. So that's also something that a lot of work we will see in the coming future. Can we get started with InVision Studio as it's free? Yes, you can get started with InVision Studio. However, the same argument lies with InVision Studio as it is, with XD. Is a lot of companies don't really use InVision Studio as a production software. So a lot of features that InVision Studio offers that you might get used to will not be present in industry standard tools like Sketch or Figma. A lot of shortcuts, a lot of plugins that InVision might have, which you can get used to, will not be present here. Or there'll be a different way to do that here. So there's still a learning curve that you might have to undergo at a later stage, but please feel free to use InVision Studio if you already have it. There's nothing that you cannot do there, which you cannot do in other tools. Next, highlight some key points on how to be more creative towards web design or graphic design. So web design and graphic design are very different fields. Graphic design is a more visual communication medium. So whatever you do visually is what takes that communication forward. Web design is a little different because it has a lot of moving pieces which you interact with. Graphic design does not. And it's the best possible advice that I have to get better in a creative way for product design, web design, mobile design, or design in general is to observe how things work around you, how people behave when they are in certain situations, what kind of products are they comfortable using in front of people, what kind of things they are not comfortable using in front of people. And so there is a lot of social dynamics at play as well. So, for example, if you have some apps in your phone which you use in Hindi, but you're in a social setting where people might judge you if your apps are in Hindi, so you would not use that app in front of other people. You would wait to come back home to actually use that. And it does happen a lot. So by observing how people are acting, you'll always find some gaps that you can fill. And those are where those creative ideas come from. Can we get good freelance projects in this field? Yes, we can get good freelance projects in this field. It depends on how the standard of the work that you have. So your portfolio is going to be very crucial. What you show as what you can do is what you can charge for it. So in my beginning days, I couldn't charge more than $5 an hour for a beginner project, which is like 500 rupees an hour. It was the rate that I had started with, and today that is around $50 an hour. So that's a 10x jump. So it really depends on how your portfolio is and what kind of clients are you looking to work with, or what kind of clients that you find. But it's perfectly possible to get good freelance work. What are the key points one which should consider while designing a B2B product rather than a B2C? So B2B products, one very big thing that B2B products are designed for, which B2C is not, is B2B products usually optimize for speed and efficiency. And speed, efficiency, and accuracy are the three things which B2B products really emphasize on. On B2C products, it's okay if you make a mistake, there's nothing lost. But in a B2B product, if you make mistakes, you can end up making huge losses for the company that you're working for. B2B and speed is of the utmost importance because there's a lot of work that you have to churn out in those applications have to churn out. For example, dashboards and all. So the dashboards need to be very succinct in the information that they're presenting. So people don't have to spend a lot of time trying to traverse through what there is. It's not, even from a pure UI standpoint, you would see a lot of B2B applications are very condensed. They try to maximize every bit of the screen real estate that's available just to have a dashboard sort of a feel where people can quickly move from one section to the other. There are some companies which have taken a different sort of an approach towards this, but those three principles still remain constant, that speed, accuracy, and efficiency are the ones that B2B absolutely optimizes for, which may not always be the case with B2C. Yeah.
So, can you list some of the points from which we can get freelancing projects?
So there are websites that you can get freelance projects from. Fiverr is one. Fiverr is where you can.
Fiverr.
Fiverr. Fiverr.
Okay.
Fiverr is one of those freelancing networks which is very popular, and you can find all sorts of all ranges of work there. A lot of projects that are available on Fiverr don't pay that much because it's a global product and people are always trying to undercut everyone on cost to get more and more work and improve their quality of work so that they can charge higher in the future. So it's a little difficult in the beginning to get work on Fiverr, but once you start getting them, it keeps getting better.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Why did you choose design inspired from coming from an engineering background? So my choice was essentially based on how. So I was always interested in how these products were designed and built, but I already always had a engineering angle to it. I didn't really know back then that a profession like design exists and there are dedicated people who design this. My understanding was that engineers do this as well because in a lot of college projects that was the expectation from us. So I just assumed that that was the case. Although when I tried to understand more and more into the front end side of things, I discovered that design is a separate piece, development is a separate piece. And since I was more interested in the design part of it than the development part of it, I chose to invest in that as opposed to whatever the college was teaching. What is the extent of cohesion between design and development teams? Do the developers have any influence on the product design? Yes, at times they do. It purely depends on the timelines that we have to ship something out, or it also depends on the base engineering structure that the company has constructed. So if tomorrow, let's say I come up with a feature which is technically not possible to do in 2 months and it's due to launch in 2 months. But what I'm proposing is something that will take approximately 6 months to do. So it's not really possible for engineering to squeeze that into 2 months, howsoever they may try to do it. So that's where we take that engineering consideration into example and they help us understand what all things they can do in that duration and taking that as a limitation. So design is always about limitations. You always have limitations. It could be business limitations, it could be engineering limitations, it could be market limitations, it could be network limitations. And whatever you build has to sort of take care of all of that. So yes, engineering does affect design decisions at times.
Sir,
Next, I have,
sir,
yeah.
sir, could you tell what were the hurdles or the mistakes which you came across during your journey, which would really help us beginners to do so?
So I think the one mistake that I had done, which I'm constantly trying to re-emphasize in this one, is to not focus on tools at first, because it really takes. So tools are not something that you can learn in a day, and even though you get the basics fairly easily, it really takes a lot of practice to get really good in designing the final visual design part of it. So I think what the visual design that I used to do back in college and college days and the ones that I do now, I've seen a drastic difference in between them. And no matter, so earlier what I used to do was I used to spend a lot of my time practicing visual design as opposed to spending my time learning more about the concepts that work around. So I was lucky enough to get a job because at that time design applicants were very low. Design was not that popular for stream back then, so I did manage to get a job. On that job, I realized that how far more important that part, that theoretical and that conceptual part of the work was, as opposed to the UI part, because the UI part you still get time, and companies usually have a lot of established ways in which they design, so you don't really have to reinvent everything. You can copy paste from other people's files from your team and use that to build them. So that was one mistake that I
So,
did, thinking that if I
so,
practice design all day, I'll get really better at it really fast, which doesn't really happen. It's something
so
that,
as you told,
yeah, go on.
so as you told before, means sticking our hands into tool, we should read few of the articles and many textbooks which would conclude upon designing. Could you refer few of the author?
So the most popular book to start off with is book by Stephen Krug. It's called Don't Make Me Think. It's a very it's a very basic conceptual book about what designing digital experiences are. It takes care of both web and mobile. It'll give you a lot of basic fundamentals to start with, and that will help you understand. So once while you're reading that book, there are a lot of exercises as well, where they would ask you to visit certain website or to see certain app, and whatever principles you've read, just see where that certain thing has been applied and how that makes a difference and what could be done differently. So that's how you get a hands-on understanding of what those concepts are. It's only when you understand those is when you can draw.
Okay. So you entered your this project product designing from campus placement or from outside you entered?
No, I found this from outside. I couldn't sit into campus placements because when campus placement started at the start, beginning of the seventh semester, I had approximately 7 or 6 backlogs. I don't even remember. I couldn't really sit. I was one of the worst people in my batch in attending classes. Like I have essentially had attendance-based issues all throughout my second year and third year. There were professors who just gave up on me and just let me sit in the exams. That no matter how much you tell him, he's not going to come to the class. And while some debarred me from the examination, so the ones that I got debarred from, I just left it,
Okay.
which I don't recommend. But yeah. Okay, next question is, I'm a communication design student. I'm interested in UX design, but I'm not into programming. Is that okay? And if I do not plan to learn any, how do I go where stands in this? You don't really, Yash, you don't really need to learn programming. Even though I come from a computer science background, I cannot write code well. I would need to Google bunch of things, and something even a basic developer can write, or a fourth year college student can write in an hour. I would take at least a day to write that. I may understand how it works better than he does, but I cannot write it. So you don't really need to know programming, and it's absolutely cool if you have no interest in learning that. You can still get into UX and you can still work at par. A lot of people, so I currently work in a 20-member team, and only 2 people have a computer science background. The rest 18 know nothing about programming. And some of these people have been doing design for 20 years now, 10, 20 years. The head of design of mine who's been working for 25 odd years. He now he understands some things about how development works, but he still has no idea what actually goes into programming those things. And he's perfectly fine with it. He doesn't need to learn it. And so do you.
Thank you.
What role does a technical product manager play in the design process? The designer interact regularly with the development team. So there are different phases of how the project runs. When the project is in its design and conceptual phase, that's where the product manager and the designer work very closely together. And this is so a technical product manager is essentially a product manager whose expertise is more towards the engineering side of things. There's also an experienced product manager whose experience is more towards the product and UX side of things. So you start collaborating with the technical product managers once the design process is complete. You know what you have to build and you've designed that. That's where you start interacting with engineering and assessing how you can build this and how you can build that. And that's where you interact on a regular basis. If the projects are a lot complex, you might need to involve engineering early on to understand if what you're designing is something that can really be built. But yeah, that's the crux. So depending on the kind of project that you're working on, you depends how you decides where or what stage you want engineering to come in. Next, is it important to be a good coder for being a good product designer? Absolutely not. Don't need to be a coder at all. And last question that I see from Vitik is, did Kit really help to make your career, or you did all by your own? This is a really tricky question to answer because uh, so I think I would say that the classes didn't really help that much. And I don't know if it could have helped because I never really went to a lot of them. I think first year was the one where my attendance was barely above 70%. And second year, I was like 10-15% or so after that. So I don't really know. I can't really answer if even if I would have attended classes, would it have really helped me a lot. What all the majority of the understanding of CS I had is from my friends who were really good at academics. So even though I was not one of them, my core friend circle at KIT was came from a very good, like most of them were 8.5, 9 pointers and so on. So we did used to spend a lot of time there. So conceptually, I was sound in terms of what that is. And I think that did benefit me in the way I have progressed in my career, but it's not anything specific to design that I gained. I think most that I gained was really good internet access all 4 years, which I never had at my home. And a lot of free time because they're not going to classes like full day. And classes were usually the time where I had like the most amount of peace, where everyone would be in the class, I would be inside the hostel. It's pin drop silence. Nobody knows what I'm doing, so nobody can judge or comment or talk about whatever I'm doing. So that way, it was really interesting. And after a certain point of time, I do remember it vividly because there was a time where I think after the end of sixth semester, when there was a summer vacation, I had come back to clear some of my like I had 14 backlogs back then, and I was told that anything above 8 will result in a year back. So I knew that I had to at least clear 6. And it was during that phase that I think one professor from training and placement told me that, why are you even trying? Who is going to hire you? And I think a couple of months later, I was standing with a offer letter from Goibibo and asking him for his signature so that I can work my entire 8 semester from that company and not stay inside the college. That was a pretty fun sort of an experience. The best part from the colleges I received is the circle that I kept eventually. They also understood what I was trying to do. So even though it was not something that they would do on their own, they were fairly understanding of it. And one very clear example of that was during placement season, where placement results would get announced, and every now and then there'll be a celebration inside the hostel, and CS students were usually the first ones to get placed. So at that time, like my hostel would be in a constant celebration mode where people were getting placed back to back and back to back and back to back. And I think by the end of first week, my entire friend circle was placed. The only good thing that I noticed, like the supportive things that I got from them, was that even though they knew that they were placed and I had no job back then, no clarity of whether or not I would find a job back then, nobody actually did celebrate to a grand extent because they knew that one person in the group is still left who has to get placed. And when I did, that's when the celebration happened. So it's that circle which really helped a lot, not the college institution in particular, but the environment. Next, can KIT provide us with product design placements? That's something that you could discuss with your TNP department. By my time, there were no people who were visiting. Maybe if they could arrange something. If there are enough students to enter into that, they might. But yeah, if there's not a lot of interest in having that, I don't think TNP would be interested in calling companies there. Last is how one should start UX design, not the tools, but the concepts to learn about it. Like I mentioned, we start off with basic books. One of them is Don't Make Me Think by Stephen Krug. That's usually a very good point to start off. You start reading from there and start discovering new things. There are a lot of new concepts that you would come across that book, which you would then search on Google and find a lot of articles on, and some video tutorial lessons on, and so on, and then proceed from there. There are curated courses available online. Most of them have become paid. I don't really encourage you to take any of them because the amount, just the sheer amount of information that's available for free is more than enough. And I have also started from that itself. If you really want to get into UX, you start finding these things out rather than having a curated. Of course, that the curated course provides you with a sense of direction. But what I found in a lot of these online courses that charge you money for it is that it's not that in depth, and you still have to do a lot of work on your own after you've completed that course. So you don't really get your money's worth in that regard. Okay.
Okay, that was great. So thank you guys for asking all your questions, and thank you, Neel sir, for spending your precious time with us. And it was really awesome to have you on board. And I think a lot of students have really, got insights from you, and this will help them in their career and lot and further as well.
Yeah, I hope it does.
All right. So we can stop the recording now, Sayan. And we've got a game right now on Kahoot. So Sayan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Manish. So